The massive doors of the council chamber slid open with a soft hiss, and Commander Jake Murphy stepped inside with Dr. Lisa Grant walking beside him. And both of them stopped for just a moment to take in the sight before them, because it was unlike anything they had ever seen. And the chamber was enormous, with a circular design that stretched upward into a dome covered in stars. Or maybe those were just lights that looked like stars, and hundreds of seats lined the walls in rising tiers, and each seat held a different alien species, and some were tall and thin like walking crystals, while others seemed to be made of gas floating in containment suits, and still others looked like insects the size of humans with too many eyes and clicking mouths, and the air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert hundreds of languages into something everyone could understand. And Jake felt his heart beating faster, because this was humanity's first time here at the Galactic Council, and he wanted to make a good impression. But the moment they walked in, the entire chamber went silent, and it was not a welcoming silence. Jake was 42 years old and had spent 20 years in Earth's military, and he had seen combat and danger and things that would make most people run away. But nothing had prepared him for the feeling of hundreds of alien eyes turning toward him with something that looked like fear. And Lisa touched his arm gently, and she was younger than him by almost 10 years, and much smarter when it came to understanding other cultures. And she whispered that they should keep walking, so they did, and their footsteps echoed in the silence, and as they moved toward the center of the chamber, Jake noticed something strange. And in the middle of the room was a large circular table with 7 chairs, and 6 of them were occupied by what must have been the most important species in the galaxy, because they sat higher than everyone else and their seats were made of materials that seemed to glow. But the 7th seat was empty, and it had a symbol on the back that made Jake's breath catch, because it was Earth's symbol with blue and green representing their home planet. A tall being made entirely of crystal approached them, and the light bent around its body in strange ways, and when it spoke, the translation device made its voice sound like wind chimes, and it introduced itself as Ambassador Vex of the Velkari. People in Vex welcomed them, but the welcome felt forced, like someone saying nice things because they had to, and not because they meant it. And Vex explained that the empty seat had been waiting for humanity for over 300 years, and Jake glanced at Lisa and saw his own confusion reflected in her face, because Earth had only developed faster than light travel 15 years ago. And before that, humanity did not even know aliens existed until a trade ship found them. So how could they have a seat waiting for 3 centuries? The council session began, and Supreme Chancellor Oryx stood up, and he was a massive reptilian creature with scales that shimmered purple and gold, and his voice boomed through the chamber without needing a translation device, and he welcomed the human delegation. But there was something cold in his tone when he mentioned their delay, and other species began speaking, and some of them sounded angry, while others sounded worried, and several suggested that Earth's seat should be given to another species, since humans had ignored it for so long, and Jake wanted to protest because none of this made sense. But Lisa grabbed his hand and shook her head, because she understood that they needed to listen and learn before they spoke. During a break in the session, Lisa went to access the Galactic Archives, and Jake followed her to a quiet corner, where holographic displays showed information in dozens of formats. And Lisa's fingers moved quickly through the interface, and she was searching for any mention of Earth or humanity in the old records, and what she found made her face go pale. And she turned to Jake with wide eyes and told him to look at the screen. And there it was, in official records from 317 years ago, and the galaxy had been invaded by something called the Devourers, and they were described as an extinction-level threat that consumed entire worlds and left nothing behind, and billions died, and hundreds of civilizations fell, and the scattered species were losing the war badly. And then Earth made contact, but not with diplomats or traders, and instead a human battle fleet appeared at something called the Battle of Broken Sky. And the record said that human warships fought with a level of efficiency and tactical brilliance that shocked everyone who witnessed it. And more importantly, humans had weapons that could actually hurt the Devourers, which no other species had managed to do. The war lasted 3 years according to the records, and Earth's military led the final assault on the Devourer homeworlds. And the details got fuzzy here, with many files marked as classified, but the result was clear, because the Devourers were not just defeated or driven away, but completely eliminated, and every single one of them was destroyed. And in gratitude, the surviving species formed the Galactic Union, and granted Earth a founding seat with full honors, and human diplomats attended the first session and accepted the seat, and then they went back to their ships and left, and they promised to return but never did, and all attempts to contact Earth after that were met with silence. Jake read the screen 3 times because it could not be real, and Earth had no records of any of this, and there were no monuments to a galactic war, and no history books mentioned the Devourers, and no veterans told stories about fighting aliens, and it was as if it never happened. And Lisa pulled up another file, and this one showed images from the war, and the human ships in the images were enormous and sleek, and covered in weapons that did not match anything in Earth's current fleet, and the technology was centuries ahead of what humanity possessed now, and the soldiers wore armor that looked like something from a science fiction movie, and Jake knew Earth's current military capabilities, and these were not them. Lisa scrolled down and found one more detail at the bottom of a treaty document, and it was a single line added by the human delegates before they left, and Jake read it out loud, and his voice sounded strange in his own ears, and the line said that Earth's seat would remain empty until it was safe for them to sit among the others, and Lisa looked at him and asked what that meant, and Jake had no answer, because nothing about this made any sense, and somewhere in the back of his mind a thought was forming, and it was impossible and terrifying, but it would not go away. And the thought was that the humans who fought that war 300 years ago were not the same humans who lived on Earth now. Jake and Lisa returned to their quarters on the station, and neither of them could sleep because their minds were racing with questions that had no good answers, and they spent hours going through every piece of data they could access from the galactic archives. And the more they learned, the less sense everything made, and the human fleet from 300 years ago had possessed technology that was impossible, because it was far more advanced than anything Earth currently had. And the battle footage showed massive warships that moved like they were alive, and weapons that seemed to bend the rules of physics, and soldiers in powered armor who moved faster and fought better than any human should be able to. And yet modern Earth had none of this technology, and Jake had been in the military his entire adult life, and he knew exactly what Earth's capabilities were, and they were good, but nothing like what the archives described. They decided to talk to Ambassador Vex directly, and they sent a message requesting a private meeting, and Vex agreed surprisingly quickly, and met them in a secure conference room away from the main chamber, and when they entered, Jake noticed that Vex's crystalline body was vibrating slightly, and Lisa had studied alien body language, and she whispered that this meant Vex was anxious or afraid, and that was not a good sign, because what did a being made of living crystal have to fear from 2 humans? Vex told them that he had been part of the council for over 200 years, and he had not been present during the Devourer War, but he had spoken with those who were there, and they all said the same thing about the humans who fought that war, and they said the humans were terrifying, but not because they were cruel or evil, and instead it was because of how efficiently they waged war, and every action was calculated, and every tactic was designed for maximum effect, and they studied their enemies and adapted faster than should have been possible for any species, and it was like watching a machine that looked like people, and Vex's voice got quieter as he continued, and he said that efficiency was not what really frightened the galaxy. What truly scared the other species was what happened after the war ended, and the human fleet gathered every piece of Devourer technology, and every biological sample and every data core, and they loaded it all into their ships, and then they systematically destroyed every Devourer world and every outpost and every trace of their civilization, and they cracked planets and sterilized moons and collapsed the Devourer home star system into a black hole. And Vex said that other species protested because surely this was excessive and the Devourers were already defeated, and some believed the Devourer technology could be studied and maybe used for good, but the humans refused, and they said the Devourers were too dangerous to exist in any form. A coalition of species tried to stop the humans from destroying the last Devourer worlds, and Vex's body dimmed as he spoke, and he said that the human fleet turned their weapons on the coalition ships, and they did not fire, but the message was clear, and the Devourers would be eliminated completely, and anyone who interfered would be treated as an enemy. And the coalition backed down because they were afraid, and the Devourers were wiped from existence. And when it was done, the human ambassador made a statement at the First Galactic Council, and Vex remembered the exact words because they had been repeated so many times over the centuries, and the ambassador said that they had done what was necessary, and they would return to Earth and they would take their seat when the galaxy had learned the lesson it needed to learn. Jake asked what lesson they meant, and Vex said that no one understood, and the humans would not explain, and they just left. And Jake then asked why no one went to Earth to find out what happened, and why did they not try harder to make contact, and Vex's entire body seemed to shrink. And he admitted that they did try once, and 50 years after the war, a delegation of 7 ships traveled to Earth's system, and they never returned, and there was no distress call, and no wreckage was found, and they simply vanished. And after that, the Council declared Earth's system off limits for everyone's safety. And Vex said quietly that the consensus among the older species was that Earth did not want to be bothered. And when Earth does not want something, it is best to listen. Before Jake could respond, an alarm sounded throughout the station, and emergency protocols activated, and the 3 of them rushed to the command center where Supreme Chancellor Oryx was coordinating responses, and screens showed a distress signal from a colony world called Haven's Gate on the outer rim. And the planet was under attack, and the attacking force was using technology that did not match anything in any database, but several species who looked at the sensor data turned pale or showed their species equivalent of fear. And an elderly ambassador from the Quill Republic who looked like a large bird with colorful feathers spoke in a trembling voice and said that those energy signatures looked familiar, and he had seen them before during the war, and those were devourer weapons. The command center erupted in panic because that was impossible, and the devourers were eliminated over 300 years ago, and every trace was destroyed, and theories flew around the room, and maybe some devourers survived in hiding, or maybe another species found their technology, or maybe it was a false flag attack. But no one seemed to have a good answer, and Supreme Chancellor Oryx demanded order. But his voice shook, and Jake noticed that while every other species was debating or arguing or panicking, there was one ambassador who sat perfectly still and stared directly at him, and it was Ambassador Krell of the Zinth Dominion, and the Zinth looked humanoid, but with gray skin and completely black eyes. After the emergency session ended, Jake approached Krell, and the Zinth greeted him with a knowing smile and said that Jake wanted to know what really happened 300 years ago, and it was not a question, but a statement. And Krell led Jake to a private ship docked at the station, and once inside, Krell activated every security measure available, and then told Jake that what he was about to share was not in any official archive because his people had been gathering intelligence for centuries, and they had sources and methods and secrets, and they knew things about Earth that terrified them. Krell explained that the Zinth were one of the first species to encounter the Devourers, and they tried to negotiate and understand them, but it was useless because the Devourers only consumed, and in their brief communications, the Devourers revealed something important, and they said they had tried to attack Earth once before long, before they invaded known space, and they failed, and not just failed to conquer, but failed to even reach the surface. And Earth had defenses that made no sense, and weapons that should not exist, and the Devourers lost 90% of their scouting force in minutes, and they decided Earth was too dangerous, and moved on to easier prey. When the Devourers began their invasion, the Zinth sent out calls for help to every species they could find, and most ignored them. But Earth responded within hours, and human warships arrived before the Zinth even finished sending location data. And it was as if they had been waiting. And Krell said that the humans who fought never explained where they came from, or how they had such advanced technology, and they coordinated perfectly, as if they had been fighting together for generations. And different species noticed strange things, like how human soldiers never showed their faces and kept helmets on at all times, and how human ships always kept distance from other vessels. And Krell's people had a theory, and he said it quietly, like speaking it too loud might make it more real. And the theory was that the humans who fought the Devourer War were not from Jake's Earth, or at least not from his time. And maybe they were from the future, or an alternate timeline or something else entirely, but they were not the humans that Jake knew. And after they eliminated the Devourers, they went back to wherever they came from, and Jake's Earth had no memory of the war, because for his Earth, it had not happened yet. And before Jake could process this impossible information, news arrived that the attack on Haven's Gate had been repelled, but the attackers retreated into deep space, and they were heading toward Earth. Jake immediately sent an emergency message to Earth Command, And even with their fastest communication systems, there was still a delay that made him want to scream, because every second mattered, and he explained everything as clearly as he could, and told them that a force using Devourer technology was heading toward Earth, and the Galactic Council believed Earth might be the target. And while they waited for a response, Lisa threw herself into research because she needed to understand what had happened, and she reached out to other ambassadors asking for any records or stories or data about the human fleet from the Devourer War. Ambassador Yenna of the Orinth Collective agreed to meet with Lisa, and the Orinth were a hive mind species that experienced time differently than most others, and Yenna was ancient and over 400 years old, and she had been present during the final battle of the Devourer War, and her quarters were kept at freezing temperatures, and Lisa's breath came out in clouds as she entered, and Yenna spoke through thousands of small insect-like bodies, and their voices combined into a haunting chorus that made Lisa's skin crawl, but she listened carefully. Yenna said she remembered the human soldiers, and they moved like water, and like something inevitable. And the Orinth sent scouts to observe human operations, and what they saw did not make sense because the efficiency was beyond reason, and humans never spoke unnecessarily and never wasted ammunition, and never took risks that were not calculated. And when they captured Devourer vessels, they studied them for exactly 17 minutes before destroying them, and it was always 17 minutes, as if they knew precisely how long it took to extract all useful data. And Yenna's chorus of voices trembled as she spoke, and she said the human fleet seemed to anticipate every Devourer tactic, and when the Devourers tried to flank the humans, were already in position, and when they tried to retreat to hidden bases, the humans were waiting, and it was as if the humans had fought this war before, and knew every move the enemy would make. The most disturbing part was the end of the war, and the final Devourer stronghold was a massive hive ship, larger than most moons, and it contained billions of Devourer organisms, and their entire genetic library, and many species pleaded with the humans to capture it intact so they could study it and learn from it. But the human commander refused, and through an audio channel, he said only that they knew what happened if even one cell survived and they had seen it, and the others had not, and they should trust them. And then they destroyed the hive ship with a weapon that Yenna still did not understand. And it was not an explosion, because the ship simply ceased to exist, and it was erased from reality, and there was no debris, and no radiation, and just empty space where a moon-sized vessel had been. Yenna said that was when they realized these humans were not fighting to save the galaxy, but to prevent something specific, and something they knew was coming. And when they left and said the galaxy needed to learn a lesson, Yenna understood, and they were from a timeline where the galaxy did not listen, and where some species tried to preserve Devourer technology, and where that decision led to something terrible. And Lisa asked what lesson the galaxy was supposed to learn, and Yenna's thousands of voices spoke as one and said that some threats must be completely eliminated, and that mercy toward an existential danger is cruelty to all future generations, and that there are things in the universe so dangerous that even their memory should be destroyed. Lisa returned to Jake with this information, and they were starting to understand something terrifying about their own species. And Earth's response finally arrived, and Commander Helen Price appeared on the screen, and she was a stern woman with gray hair and hard eyes, and she had been briefed on the situation, and her message was short and cold, and she told Jake and Lisa to return to Earth immediately, and not to remain on the station, and not to engage with any force using Devourer technology, and if confronted they should retreat, and Earth was beginning something called Protocol Nightfall. Jake had never heard of Protocol Nightfall, and neither had anyone else on their ship, and when he asked for clarification, Commander Price looked directly into the camera and said that 30 years ago, they found something buried in Antarctica, and it was a facility that should not exist, and there were no records of its construction, and they could not date it because it used materials they could not analyze, and inside were blueprints and weapons and ships and a message written in every human language that had ever existed. And the message said that when they came back, humanity would need these things, and they should not ask questions, but just build them and trust their future. Lisa felt her mind struggling to accept this, and she asked how future humans could leave weapons in the past because that was impossible. But Commander Price said they did not know, and they did not understand the physics, but they followed the instructions, And they built the ships and they trained soldiers in tactics they did not invent, and they waited. And the message said they would know when the time came, and Price believed that time was now. Back at the Galactic Council, Supreme Chancellor Orcs demanded that Earth share any information they had about the Devourer threat, and the other species were terrified, and they wanted Earth's protection, and wanted access to whatever weapons had defeated the Devourers before. And Jake and Lisa found themselves in an impossible position, because they were diplomats and not military commanders, and they did not have authority to make these decisions, but the galaxy was looking to Earth for answers, and Earth was revealing secrets that had been hidden for decades. The situation got worse when the Saurine Empire announced they had been conducting secret research into Devourer remains, and 50 years ago they discovered a preserved Devourer specimen in old battlefield wreckage, and they had been studying it and trying to understand its biology and maybe even weaponize it. And the council chamber exploded in chaos, and multiple species condemned the Saurine. But then others admitted they too had been doing similar research, and the Velkari revealed they had been trying to reverse-engineer Devourer energy systems, and the Kryn hive minds confessed they had been studying Devourer neural patterns to enhance their own collective intelligence. Jake stood up and his voice cut through the noise, and he called them idiots and said they did not understand. And this was why Earth's seat was empty. And this was the lesson they were supposed to learn, and the Devourers were not just a species, but a virus and a concept, and once someone started thinking like them and studying them and trying to use their power, they became them. And Ambassador Vex protested and said Jake could not prove that, and it was just speculation. But Jake pulled up data from the Haven's Gate attack and told them to look at the energy signatures and the tactical patterns, and he asked if it looked like someone found old Devourer weapons, or if it looked like someone became Devourers. The room went silent because he was right, and the attack patterns did not match historical Devourer tactics, and they were more sophisticated and more adapted, as if whatever attacked Haven's Gate had learned and evolved, and an alert sounded and new data came from Haven's Gate, and survivors had been recovered, but something was wrong, and medical teams reported that the survivors were changing, and their cells were rewriting themselves, and they were becoming something else. Ambassador Krell spoke up and said this happened before at the end of the original war, and some species tried to capture Devourers alive for study, and every single research facility was destroyed by the human fleet, and they said the Devourers could convert other species and turn them into extensions of themselves, and not through technology, but through biological contamination. And they called it the Devourer's final weapon. And Supreme Chancellor Oryx turned to Jake and asked what Earth recommended. Jake looked at the data and at the horrified faces around him and at Lisa, who nodded, and he thought about future humans who came back to prevent this exact scenario, and he thought about the empty seat and the warning that came with it, and he said they needed to quarantine Haven's Gate with complete lockdown, and nothing could leave and nothing could enter, and then they had to wait for Earth's fleet to arrive, and when they got there, the galaxy needed to let them do what was necessary. And no questions and no debate, because the galaxy had proven it could not be trusted with this threat. And multiple species protested and claimed Earth had no authority. But others who were older and remembered the war stayed silent, because they were remembering what human efficiency looked like, and they were terrified it might be turned on them. 3 days passed in terrible tension, and Haven's Gate remained under quarantine. But reports from the medical teams grew more desperate with each hour, and the contamination was spreading faster than anyone anticipated, and the survivors were no longer the species they had been, and they were becoming something unified and something that moved with single purpose. And the Galactic Council met every 6 hours in emergency sessions, and factions were forming, because fear made people react in different ways, and the Saurine Empire and their allies argued for a military solution using their own weapons, and the Velkari suggested trying to communicate with the infected because maybe there were still conscious beings inside, and the Kryn hive minds proposed using their collective intelligence to interface with the contamination because they thought they might understand or control it. Jake and Lisa argued against every proposal, and they shared everything they had learned from Krell and Yenna, and they explained that the Devourers were not just a biological threat or a military problem, but a fundamental challenge to the concept of individual identity and free will, and Lisa told the council that they could not negotiate with something that wanted to consume them, and they could not study something that studied them back faster, and they absolutely could not try to merge with it, thinking they would maintain control, because the Devourers did not fight in traditional ways, and they assimilated, and every attempt to understand them just gave them more information. The council was divided, and fear made some species aggressive while others became desperate for any solution that did not involve complete destruction, and the Quill Republic proposed advanced containment fields, and the Zinth Dominion suggested they could evacuate all life from Haven's Gate and seal the planet permanently. But then everything changed when Earth's fleet arrived. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, and every sensor on the station screamed warnings because there were hundreds of ships, and they matched nothing in humanity's current military. And these vessels were the ones from the archives and from the Devourer War 300 years ago, and they were massive and angular and built for one purpose only. And the council erupted in confusion. Because how was this possible? And how did Earth have these ships? And Jake and Lisa were just as shocked because Commander Price said they had been building something, but this was an entire battle fleet that should not exist. A transmission came through on priority channels, and a woman's face appeared on every screen in the council chamber, and she was in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled back tight, and she wore a uniform that looked similar to modern Earth military, but with strange additions and symbols, and her voice was calm and cold when she spoke, and she said her name was Admiral Kate Morrison of the Earth Defense Fleet, and they were taking command of the situation under authority granted by the Galactic Union Treaty Article 7, subsection 3, which stated that in matters of existential threat to multiple species, the founding member with relevant expertise could take operational control. Supreme Chancellor Oryx protested and said that provision was theoretical and had never been invoked, and Earth had no right to take over. But Morrison interrupted him and said they had every right, and they were not there to debate, and they were there to do what the Council had proven it could not do, and that was eliminate this threat completely, and the Earth fleet moved with precision toward Haven's Gate, and other species ships scattered to give them room. And Lisa pulled up tactical data, and what she saw was beautiful and terrifying, because the human ships moved in perfect coordination, like a school of fish or birds in flight, and there was no communication lag and no hesitation, and just pure synchronized efficiency. Morrison continued speaking and said they were establishing a hard perimeter around Haven's Gate, and any ship that crossed it would be disabled, and they were not asking permission but informing everyone of reality. And this was what Earth did, and this was what they had always done, and they dealt with threats that terrified others because they understood them better than anyone wanted to know. And Ambassador Krell pulled Jake aside and said Morrison was not lying because his people had analyzed the human ships, and they used technology that could not be identified, and materials that bent light in impossible ways, and weapons that manipulated fundamental forces. And this was not 30 years of secret research, but centuries, or maybe thousands of years of development, and those ships were from humanity's future. Jake said that time travel was impossible, but Krell asked if it was really impossible or just impossible for most species. And he gestured at the screens showing Earth's fleet and asked, what if humanity developed these technologies eventually? And what if they discovered time was not linear? And what if future humans came back not just to fight the Devourers, but to create a loop, and to ensure their species always had what they needed when necessary? And on Haven's Gate, the contamination had spread beyond any hope of control, and the entire planet was now one massive devourer organism, and ships in orbit reported that the surface was changing and growing new structures that pulsed with terrible purpose, and something was being built. Morrison addressed the council again and said they knew what was happening, because the Devourers were constructing a transmitter, and if it activated, it would broadcast a signal across the galaxy, and that signal carried the contamination itself, and every species that received it and every world with advanced receivers would begin transformation, and they had approximately 4 hours before it went active, and the council descended into chaos because 4 hours was not enough time to evacuate. Nearby systems and billions of lives were at risk, and species demanded that Earth save them and protect them, and do something other than destroy the planet. Morrison's expression became hard, and she said that everyone wanted to know why Earth's seat was empty, and wanted to know the lesson they were supposed to learn, and here it was, and some things could not be saved, and some threats were so absolute that mercy became mass murder. And the Devourers proved that once, and the galaxy was proving it again by not learning. And she said they came from a future where the galaxy made the compassionate choice and tried to save the infected, and tried to preserve Devourer knowledge for study, and that future ended with everything consumed and every single world fell, and Earth was last only because they had a plan. She paused, and her eyes reflected something ancient and sad, and she said they sent themselves back, and not just soldiers but entire fleets with ships and weapons and knowledge, and they had been doing this for cycles and for iterations of reality that others did not have the framework to understand, and every time they came back to this moment, and every time they said to destroy it all, and every time some species did not listen, and the only thing that changed was how many worlds survived. Their compassion, and Lisa felt tears on her face and asked if they were in a loop and if this had happened before. Morrison said it was not a loop, because loops meant repetition, but this was refinement, and each time they saved more worlds, and each time fewer species made the fatal mistake of studying the Devourers, and each time they arrived faster, and this was the first iteration where they got there before the transmitter activated. And that was progress, and the Earth fleet engaged, and their weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had seen, and beams of light that erased, rather than destroyed, and missiles that folded space and drones that moved too fast for sensors. And the battle lasted 17 minutes, and exactly 17 minutes, just like the archives said. When it was over, Haven's Gate was gone, and not destroyed but erased, and a perfect sphere of empty space existed where a planet used to be. And there was no debris and no radiation and just void, and the council sat in stunned silence, and some were horrified at the display of power while others were relieved, and a few who remembered understood what just happened. And Admiral Morrison made one final transmission and said the contamination was eliminated, and all affected ships were destroyed, and they had seeded the area with satellites, and nothing would grow there for 1,000 years, and everyone was safe for now. Supreme Chancellor Oryx found his voice and said they killed billions because there were civilians on Haven's Gate and innocents, but Morrison's voice was ice when she replied and said they stopped being individuals the moment contamination touched them, and they became extensions of a devourer. And Earth did not kill billions but prevented trillions from dying later. And this was the price, and this was what Earth did, and they made the impossible choice. So others did not have to, and they carried the guilt so others could sleep, and they sat alone so others could sit together. And the Earth fleet departed as suddenly as they arrived and vanished back into faster than light. And Jake and Lisa were left on the station surrounded by aliens, who looked at Earth with equal parts gratitude and terror, and the empty seat suddenly made perfect sense, because you could not sit in the community when you were the one who had to destroy parts of it to save the whole. The weeks after Haven's Gate changed everything in galactic politics, and several species called for restrictions on Earth's military power, while others proposed formal alliances wanting Earth's protection, and the Council was divided and chaotic, and uncertain about what humanity represented, and Jake and Lisa remained on the station as ambassadors. But really they were observers trying to understand their own species now, because Earth had been communicating with them daily, and explaining things that were kept secret for decades. The Antarctic facility was real, and it was not just found 30 years ago, because it had been there for centuries and maybe longer, and different parts of it appeared at different times as if phasing in from somewhere else, and each time a new section appeared. It contained technology slightly more advanced than what humanity currently possessed, and blueprints for ships they could almost build, and weapons they could almost understand, and tactical manuals written in language that felt both familiar and strange, like future slang that had not been invented yet. And Commander Price explained over a secure channel that it was a trail of breadcrumbs, and future humans were guiding them toward becoming what they needed to be. And every generation got access to the next level of technology, and every generation trained for a war that might come, and they were being shaped deliberately into the species that could do what was necessary. Lisa asked the question that haunted her, and she wanted to know what happened if humanity did not want to become that. And what if they chose a different path? And Price was silent for a long moment before answering, and she said, then they were not the Earth that survived, and the timeline would collapse and reset, and another version of them would try, and the humans who built those ships and fought the Devourers and erased Haven's Gate were not better than them, but just the versions of humanity that made hard choices, and somewhere, somehow, they found a way to ensure they always existed. Jake struggled with this because he was military and trained to protect people, But the future humans did not protect in traditional ways, and they preemptively destroyed, and they operated on a doctrine of absolute threat elimination. And it was logical and necessary, but also terrifying. And Ambassador Krell visited them one evening with new information, because his intelligence network had been tracking the fallout from Haven's Gate, and it turned out the Saurine Empire was not the only species conducting devourer research, and 7 different civilizations had secret programs, and each one was now exposed by the panic. Krell said the Velkari were synthesizing devourer genetic material to enhance their crystalline bodies, and the Quill Republic was studying devourer neural patterns to improve computing systems, and the Zinth Dominion, which was his own people, had been analyzing devourer communication methods to improve espionage, and his black eyes reflected shame as he spoke. And he said they had all been making the same mistake because they saw power and wanted to understand it and control it and use it. And that was what got them killed in the original timeline. And that was what Earth had been preventing, and not by teaching or warning, but by being the inevitable consequence, and by being the species that would erase anything that played with devourer technology. The Galactic Council scheduled a special session, and this time it was not about Haven's Gate, but about Earth and what they represented for the galaxy's future. And Jake and Lisa attended, and the chamber was tense, and Supreme Chancellor Oryx opened the session by formally recognizing Earth's role in the crisis, and then he did something unexpected, and asked Earth to take their seat in the founding member seat that had been empty, and Jake stood to respond. But before he could speak, a hologram activated in the center of the chamber, and it was Admiral Morrison projecting from wherever the fleet had gone. Morrison said they appreciated the gesture, but the seat would remain empty, and not as punishment but as a reminder and a symbol of what must exist outside the community, for the community to exist at all. And Ambassador Vex asked if Earth would never join them, and Morrison said Earth had a different role because the other species were the civilization that thrived and traded and explored and created, while Earth was the fail-safe and the emergency protocol and the thing that activated when everything else failed, and they could not be both, because if they sat among the others they would become like them and start to compromise and start to believe in second chances, and the universe did not allow second chances with existential threats. Yenna spoke through her chorus of voices and asked how humans could bear this burden, because they were individuals with hopes and fears. So how could an entire species exist to be the galaxy's executioner? And Morrison's expression softened slightly, and she said because they had seen the alternative, and in the timeline they came from humanity, tried to be part of the community, and they were diplomats and traders and friends, and when the devourers came, they tried to fight with measured force and rules of engagement and hope that some could be saved, and they learned too late that existential threats could not be fought with civilization's rules, and they had to fight from outside civilization. Morrison continued and said so they changed and went back and established the protocol, and Earth became the guardian that never sat down, and the species that stayed armed and alone, so others could be peaceful and together. And it was not fair, and not kind, but it was necessary. And Lisa stood with tears in her eyes and asked about herself and Jake because they were there, and part of the community. So did that make them traitors? And Morrison said no. And it made them the other half, because someone had to remember they were doing this for something. And someone had to understand both sides, and the humans on Earth who built weapons and trained soldiers needed to know there was still connection to the galaxy, and still hope that one day when threats were gone, Earth could take its seat, and Jake and Lisa were not traitors but humanity's conscience. The council debated for hours after Morrison ended the transmission, and proposals were made and rejected, and some wanted formal alliance with Earth, while others wanted monitoring and control, and a few suggested Earth's approach was too extreme. And surely there were other ways, but Yenna ended it. And she said she had lived longer than most civilizations and seen empires rise and fall, and witnessed wonders and horrors. And Earth was right, and not morally right, or philosophically right, but practically right, because the devourers were an impossible problem. And Earth became the impossible solution. And if that meant they sat apart, and if that meant others feared them a little, then so be it, because fear was the price of survival. The council reached consensus, and Earth's founding seat would remain empty, but with new designation. And it was no longer just a seat, but a declaration and a promise that if another existential threat emerged, Earth would respond, and not as friends or allies, but as the galaxy's final option. And Jake and Lisa remained on the station as permanent ambassadors with a unique role, because they interpreted Earth to the galaxy, and the galaxy to Earth, and they were the bridge between the community and the Guardian. Months passed and life returned to normal, or at least a new normal, and species continued research and exploration. But everyone was more careful now because no one wanted to discover something that would trigger Earth's response, and the threat of erasure was powerful motivation for caution. And one night Lisa accessed the archives again, looking for something specific, and she searched for any other records of species like Earth and civilizations that took on the Guardian role in cultures that stood outside to protect, and she found 7 historical references and 7 other species across millions of years that did what Earth did, and each one eventually disappeared, and some were destroyed, and some ascended beyond physical reality, and one simply left the galaxy entirely. The pattern was clear, and the Guardian eventually burned out or evolved beyond the need to guard, and Earth's future was already written in ancient history, and she shared this with Jake, and they sat in their quarters looking at stars and thinking about their species' strange destiny, and Jake asked if Earth would survive being the Guardian, and Lisa said she did not know. But that was the point, because future humans kept coming back, and each timeline, each iteration they were trying to find the version of humanity that could bear this burden without being destroyed, and maybe they were that version or maybe not. But they were trying, and that had to count for something. On Earth in the Antarctic facility, another section phased into reality, and scientists and military personnel examined new technology, and among blueprints and schematics was a message in plain English, and it said to whoever reads this that the burden was heavy. And they knew people questioned if this was right, and they did not have answers but only results. And in their timeline they made different choices and tried to be gentle and compassionate and believe in second chances. And the galaxy burned, and everything they loved turned to ash, so they came back and became harder and colder and more efficient, and became the thing they feared. So others would not have to. And was it worth it? And they did not know, but they were still there and still fighting and still trying to find the timeline where everyone survived, including them, and the message said to keep building and keep training and keep the seat empty until it was safe, and trust the future because they were working. The final image was